Hey guys, welcome back to another Atlas Archives journey, where tonight we're venturing into one of history's most surprising transformations. Picture this: a nation so poor in 1951 that it exported ostrich feathers for survival, yet within a decade became one of the world's wealthiest countries. This is Libya, where ancient civilizations left cities buried in sand, where Italian colonizers met their match in desert fighters, and where the largest oil reserves in Africa lie beneath some of Earth's most forbidding terrain. From the Mediterranean ports where Phoenician traders once haggled over purple dye, to the Saharan oases where Tuareg nomads still navigate by stars, Libya's story spans millennia of conquest, resistance, and reinvention. We'll explore how geography shaped destiny, how a 27-year-old colonel changed everything, and why this strategically positioned crossroads between Africa and Europe remains one of the most complex nations on our planet. If you find yourself oddly soothed by tales of ancient empires and modern upheavals when you're in excellent company, hit that subscribe button and join our community of fellow history enthusiasts scattered across time zones from Auckland to Alaska. So dim the lights, settle into your favourite listening position, and let's begin our journey through the remarkable story of Libya. Chapter 1: Ancient Foundations and Early Civilizations. Libya sits like a sleeping giant on Africa's northern coast, stretching across more than 1.7 million square kilometres of mostly desert terrain. To put that in perspective, it's roughly the size of Alaska, or about 3 times the size of France, though admittedly with far fewer croissants and considerably more sand. The country's coastline extends for over 1,700 kilometres along the Mediterranean Sea, creating a natural gateway between Europe and Africa. The country's name itself carries the weight of antiquity, derived from the ancient Greek word Libya, which originally referred to the entire African continent west of Egypt. The Greeks, bless them, weren't particularly creative with naming conventions, much like how they called all foreigners barbarians, simply because their languages sounded like ba to Greek ears. Our story begins not with grand empires or mighty pharaohs, but with the indigenous Berber peoples who have called this land home for thousands upon thousands of years. These resilient communities, who prefer to be called Amazi, meaning free people, developed sophisticated societies long before outsiders ever set foot on their shores. They were master traders, skilled craftsmen, accomplished astronomers, and perhaps most impressively, they figured out how to thrive in one of Earth's most challenging environments. While other ancient peoples were still trying to work out basic agriculture, the Berbers were already running complex trade networks across the Sahara, presumably with much better customer service than modern shipping companies. The earliest evidence of human habitation in Libya dates back an astounding 8,000 years, when the Sahara was actually a green savanna filled with lakes, rivers, and abundant wildlife. This period, known as the African Humid Period, transformed what we now know as barren desert into a lush landscape. Rock art found throughout the Fezzan region depicts elephants, giraffes, crocodiles, hippos, and cattle herding, proving that Libya was once the world's most unlikely safari destination. These ancient artists created masterpieces that make contemporary art installations look embarrassingly pretentious by comparison. The Tadrat Akakis rock art sites contain thousands of paintings spanning several millennia, documenting the gradual transition from hunters to pastoralists to desert dwellers. Imagine trying to explain a modern conceptual art piece consisting of a banana taped to a wall to these ancient painters who were casually illustrating their daily encounters with now extinct megafauna. As the climate gradually shifted and the Sahara began its inexorable transformation into the desert we know today, The Berber peoples adapted with remarkable ingenuity that would impress modern environmental engineers. They developed the Foggara system, an intricate network of underground channels that transported water across vast distances through a combination of gravity flow and human engineering genius. This irrigation marvel consisted of gently sloping tunnels, sometimes stretching for dozens of kilometers, that tapped into underground water sources and delivered fresh water to oasis communities and agricultural areas. The Foggara system predates Roman aqueducts by centuries and was arguably more sophisticated in its environmental integration, though it never got the same press coverage, probably because the Berbers were too busy actually using their water systems to write lengthy inscriptions about how magnificent they were. Unlike Roman engineering, which often fought against natural landscapes, the Foggara worked with the desert environment, creating sustainable water management that allowed communities to flourish for centuries without depleting their water sources. Modern hydrologists studying these ancient systems often find themselves humbled by their efficiency and longevity. Around the 7th century BCE, Phoenician traders from modern-day Lebanon established settlements along the coast. These entrepreneurial seafarers founded trading posts including Sabratha, Oea, modern Tripoli, and Leptis Magna. The Phoenicians brought their revolutionary writing system, which would eventually evolve into our modern alphabet. Without their contribution, you might be reading hieroglyphics right now, which would make bedtime stories significantly more challenging. The Phoenicians were followed by Greek colonists who established Cyrenaica in eastern Libya. The Greeks founded 5 major cities known as the Pentapolis, with Cyrene as their crown jewel. Legend has it that Cyrene was founded when colonists from drought-stricken Thera followed a sacred crow sent by Apollo to find the perfect location. While this sounds like ancient fake news, archaeological evidence suggests they chose exceptionally well. Cyrene was renowned throughout the ancient world for its production of silphium, a mysterious plant that was worth more than its weight in gold, and became the backbone of Cyrenaica's economy for centuries. This wonder herb was supposedly a cure-all medicine, a fantastic seasoning, an effective contraceptive, and possibly even an aphrodisiac, making it the ancient equivalent of a Swiss Army knife crossed with a pharmacy and a dating app. The plant grew exclusively in the highlands around Cyrene, and despite numerous attempts to cultivate it elsewhere, it stubbornly refused to grow anywhere else, making Cyrene the sole global supplier of this miraculous plant. The Romans loved silphium so much that they depicted it on their coins, used it in their finest cuisine, and considered it essential for upper-class Roman life. Demand was so high and the plant so difficult to cultivate that it was eventually harvested to complete extinction sometime around the 1st century CE. This makes silphium possibly history's first documented case of a species being literally loved to death, which is both touching and deeply unfortunate, like a botanical version of a celebrity who couldn't handle fame. Modern botanists still debate what silphium actually was, with theories ranging from giant fennel to an entirely unique species that we'll never see again. The Greek colonists in Cyrenaica developed a sophisticated society that successfully blended Hellenic culture with local Berber traditions, creating a unique Greco-Libyan civilization that flourished for over 8 centuries. They built magnificent temples dedicated to both Greek gods and local deities, established schools of philosophy that attracted students from across the Mediterranean, and created some of the ancient world's most beautiful art and architecture. The famous Venus to Cyrene, a stunning marble sculpture discovered in 1873, rivals any masterpiece from classical Athens or Rome, and demonstrates the high level of artistic achievement reached in this remote corner of the Greek world. The Greeks also introduced advanced agricultural techniques that helped transform parts of eastern Libya into what contemporary writers called the Mediterranean's breadbasket. They developed terraced farming, improved irrigation systems, and introduced new crops that thrived in the semi-arid climate. Their success in agriculture was so remarkable that Cyrenaica continued to export grain to other parts of the Mediterranean for centuries, proving that ancient climate change adaptation was possible with enough ingenuity, cooperation, and presumably fewer committee meetings than contemporary environmental initiatives require. Meanwhile, in western Libya, Carthaginian influence grew as that great North African power expanded its reach. The Carthaginians, essentially Phoenicians who had mastered both commerce and warfare, recruited Berber warriors into their armies. These fighters would play crucial roles in Carthage's conflicts with Rome, including Hannibal's legendary Alpine crossing with elephants. One can only imagine the logistics meetings for that expedition. The relationship between Carthage and the Libyan Berbers was complex and often strained. While the Carthaginians brought trade opportunities, they also imposed heavy taxes and harsh rule. This led to rebellions, most notably the Mercenary War from 241 to 237 BCE, when unpaid Berber soldiers nearly destroyed the Carthaginian Empire. Ancient historians called it the Truceless War, which sounds like a workplace dispute that got seriously out of hand. During this turbulent period, several indigenous kingdoms emerged in the interior regions of Libya, proving that Berber political organization was far more sophisticated than coastal powers often recognized. The most prominent and successful was the Kingdom of the Garamantes, centered in the Fezzan Basin deep in the Sahara Desert. The Garamantes developed an incredibly sophisticated civilization that lasted for over 1,000 years, from around 500 BCE to 700 CE, making it one of Africa's longest-lasting ancient kingdoms and demonstrating remarkable political and environmental stability. The Garamantian capital at Garama was a marvel of ancient urban planning, complete with massive defensive walls, impressive public buildings, residential districts that housed tens of thousands of people, and sophisticated water management systems that made desert urbanization possible. They were particularly skilled in ironworking, creating tools and weapons that gave them significant military and economic advantages over their neighbors. Their society was hierarchical but apparently quite stable and prosperous, lasting considerably longer than the Roman Empire, while showing far more environmental sustainability and social cohesion. The Garamantes even figured out how to practice large-scale agriculture in the heart of the Sahara while maintaining ecological balance, which makes contemporary debates about sustainable agriculture seem somewhat less groundbreaking by comparison. They cultivated millet, sorghum, and other drought-resistant crops using sophisticated irrigation systems that included both the Foggara technology and innovative surface water management. Archaeological evidence suggests they maintained extensive gardens and even small forests around their major settlements, creating green oases that supported large populations in one of Earth's most challenging environments. Archaeological evidence reveals that the Garamantes had extensive trade connections reaching across Africa and into the Mediterranean world, making them crucial intermediaries in ancient international commerce. Their merchants carried goods from sub-Saharan Africa northward to Mediterranean ports, while bringing Mediterranean products, ideas, and technologies south into the African interior. Among their most valuable trade goods were exotic animals destined for Roman amphitheatres, gold from West African mines, precious stones, ivory, and unfortunately, slaves captured in raids against neighbouring peoples. They also traded in salt, which was literally worth its weight in gold in many ancient societies, making the Garamantes essentially the ancient world's most successful seasoning distributors, with a monopoly on a product that everyone needed but few could produce efficiently. Their control of trans-Saharan trade routes made them wealthy and powerful, allowing them to maintain their independence even as great empires rose and fell around the Mediterranean basin. The Garamantes developed their own unique cultural practices that blended influences from across Africa and the Mediterranean. Their elaborate burial customs involved constructing pyramid-like tombs reminiscent of Nubian architecture, suggesting cultural connections with kingdoms far up the Nile River. Their extensive rock art depicts scenes of daily life, religious ceremonies, and interactions with various animals both domestic and wild, providing invaluable insights into ancient Saharan life. Perhaps most remarkably, they appear to have been one of the few ancient civilizations to successfully integrate horse-drawn chariots into desert warfare, essentially becoming the ancient equivalent of mechanized cavalry units operating in one of Earth's most challenging military environments. As we reach the end of this first chapter in Libya's long and fascinating history, we see a land already rich in cultural diversity, technological innovation, and political complexity. The indigenous Berber peoples had created sustainable societies perfectly adapted to their challenging but diverse environment. Phoenician and Greek colonists had established thriving coastal cities that connected Libya to the broader Mediterranean world of trade, culture, and ideas. The Garamantes had built a remarkable desert empire that controlled crucial trans-Saharan trade routes and demonstrated that sophisticated urban civilization could flourish even in the Sahara's harsh embrace. These ancient foundations would prove absolutely crucial in shaping Libya's future development over the centuries and millennia to come. The trading networks, cultural exchanges, urban planning principles, and agricultural innovations established during these early centuries created patterns and precedents that would influence Libyan society long after these ancient kingdoms had fallen into memory. The successful blend of indigenous Berber culture with Mediterranean influences established Libya's unique and enduring position as a bridge between Africa and Europe, between the desert and the sea, between the ancient world and all the civilizations yet to come. As our journey through ancient Libya draws to a close, we can almost hear the echoes of these early civilizations carried on the desert wind that still blows across this ancient land. The Berber traders calling out prices in busy markets, Greek philosophers debating under olive trees in Cyrene's academies, Garamantian engineers directing the construction of fogaras that would water their desert gardens for centuries to come. These were the people who first shaped Libya, who gave it its distinctive character, and who laid the unshakable foundations for everything that would follow in this remarkable corner of Africa. In the next chapter, we'll see how the mighty Roman Empire would build upon these ancient foundations. But that's a story for another section of our journey through time. Chapter 2: Roman and Byzantine Libya. Welcome back to our journey through Libya's rich tapestry of history. As we left our last chapter, we saw how ancient civilizations had laid the groundwork for something magnificent. Tonight, we follow the story into Libya's Roman period, when this desert meets Mediterranean land became one of the jewels of the greatest empire the world had ever known. So, settle back into your pillows as we explore how Rome transformed Libya into a prosperous provincial showcase that would eventually produce an emperor of its own. The Roman conquest of Libya wasn't a single dramatic invasion, but rather a gradual process that unfolded over nearly a century, like a very slow-motion empire expansion that would make modern corporate acquisitions look rushed by comparison. The coastal region of Tripolitania wasn't immediately annexed after Carthage's final defeat in 146 BCE, but was left under the control of Berber kings of Numidia until the coastal cities themselves asked for Roman protection. Meanwhile, in the east, Ptolemy Apion, the last Greek ruler of Cyrenaica, actually bequeathed the region to Rome in his will, which was formalized when Rome annexed it in 74 BCE and joined it with Crete as a single province. This peaceful transition in Cyrenaica was remarkably civilized for ancient standards, though one has to wonder about the dinner party conversations that led to someone casually leaving an entire country to Rome in their will. Under Augustus, the Romans completed their conquest of the region, with Cornelius Balbus Minor occupying northern Fezzan, the area the Romans called Fessania. The Romans were nothing if not thorough when it came to administrative geography, even if their naming conventions occasionally lacked imagination. For more than 400 years, Tripolitania and Cyrenaica were part of a cosmopolitan state whose citizens shared a common language, legal system, and Roman identity. What made Roman Libya particularly fascinating was how it maintained its distinct regional characters while becoming thoroughly integrated into the imperial system. The Romans transformed Libyan cities and their infrastructure according to Roman urban planning principles, and while the culture and population became Romanized, Tripolitania retained strong Punic influences and Cyrenaica maintained its Greek heritage. The transformation was spectacular. Roman ruins like those of Leptis Magna and Sabratha attest to the vitality of the region, where populous cities and smaller towns enjoyed the amenities of urban life: forums, markets, public entertainments, and baths, found in every corner of the Roman Empire. Roman engineers brought their legendary infrastructure skills to Libya, constructing roads, aqueducts, harbours, and public buildings that turned coastal settlements into Mediterranean showpieces. They even figured out how to make the desert bloom, or at least make it significantly more profitable than anyone had previously imagined possible. Tripolitania became a major exporter of olive oil and agricultural products, as well as a centre for gold and slaves conveyed to the coast by the Garamantes, while Cyrenaica remained an important source of wines, drugs, and horses. The Libyan provinces became so prosperous that they could afford to send massive tribute to Rome. By 46 BCE, Leptis Magna's olive oil production was so extensive that the city provided £3 million of oil annually to Julius Caesar as tax, which suggests either remarkable agricultural efficiency or a tax collector with a serious olive oil addiction. The golden age of Roman Libya reached its pinnacle during the reign of Emperor Septimius Severus, who happened to be Libya's most famous son. Born on April 11th, 145 CE in Leptis Magna, Lucius Septimius Severus became Roman Emperor from 193 to 211 CE. He was described as Libyan by race by the Roman historian Cassius Dio and is considered the first provincial emperor, being the first emperor not only born in the provinces but also into a provincial family of non-Italian origin. Septimius Severus came from a wealthy family of mixed heritage. His father was of Punic origin, while his mother descended from Italian Fulvii. He grew up in Leptis Magna as a native Punic speaker but was educated in Latin and Greek, though he spoke with a slight accent. This multilingual background would serve him well in ruling a diverse empire, though it probably made him the target of ethnic jokes from Roman aristocrats who had never ventured beyond the city walls. The path from provincial boy to emperor wasn't easy. When 18-year-old Severus sailed to Rome around 163 CE, he advanced through customary offices, joining the Senate in 169 CE. His early career included obligatory postings to less glamorous locations. His rise accelerated during the Antonine Plague, which thinned senatorial ranks and created opportunities. By the 190s CE, he commanded Danube frontier legions. When Emperor Commodus was assassinated in 192 CE, Rome entered civil war. After the first two self-proclaimed emperors were assassinated in 193 CE, Severus was declared emperor by his troops and marched on Rome, winning Senate approval by force. He defeated rivals Pescennius Niger in 194 CE and Clodius Albinus in 197 CE. Once secure, Severus never forgot his Libyan roots. He favoured Leptis Magna above all provincial cities, making it the third most important city in Africa, rivaling Carthage and Alexandria. In 205 CE, he and the imperial family visited the city. His building program was extensive: a magnificent new forum, rebuilt harbour facilities, colonnade streets, and the distinctive four-sided tetrapylon arch that served as a massive ancient billboard advertising the hometown boy who made it big. Severus also defended Libya with an enlarged limes Tripolitanus against the Garamantes, who remained a client state of Rome but as nomads always endangered the fertile coastal area. The frontier system he established helped secure Libya's prosperity for generations, proving that good infrastructure investment pays dividends across centuries, unlike modern politicians who rarely think beyond the next election cycle. Under Severan rule, Libya reached a golden age in the 2nd century CE when Leptis Magna rivaled Carthage and Alexandria in prominence. Merchants and artisans from many parts of the Roman world established themselves in coastal Libya, while former soldiers were settled in the Centenaria area of Tripolitania, where the arid land was developed with dams and cisterns built in the Wadi Ghiza to regulate flash floods. The Romans had essentially created a Mediterranean California in North Africa, complete with urban development, agricultural innovation, and presumably the ancient equivalent of expensive imported wine. As part of Diocletian's reorganization of the empire in 296 CE, the emperor separated the administration of Crete from Cyrenaica and formed the new provinces of Upper Libya and Lower Libya, using the term Libya as a political designation for the first time in history. This administrative reform recognized Libya's importance while creating more manageable provincial units, though it probably generated the kind of bureaucratic confusion that makes modern government reorganizations look straightforward. However, even the mighty Roman Empire couldn't last forever, and Libya's Roman Golden Age began to fade in the later imperial period. After Septimius Severus, Roman Libya slowly declined over the next century before being devastated by the tsunami of 365 CE. Recovery faltered, and well before the Arab invasion in the mid-7th century, Greco-Roman civilization had been collapsing in the area except for Oea. The decline was gradual but inexorable, like watching a beautiful building slowly crumble because nobody wanted to pay for proper maintenance. The situation became more complicated when new players entered Libya's historical stage. The Vandals, a Germanic tribe, occupied Roman North Africa in the early 5th century, taking control of Libya in 430 CE. Under their king Gaiseric, the Vandals used their navy to conduct pirate attacks across the Mediterranean, sacked Rome in 455 CE, and defeated a massive Roman invasion in 468 CE. The Vandals had essentially turned the Mediterranean into their private lake, though they proved much better at conquest than at long-term governance. Unlike other Germanic kingdoms that gradually assimilated Roman administrative practices, the Vandals maintained a stark separation between conqueror and conquered, making virtually no improvements to the inherited Roman civilization. The Vandals adhered to Arianism, a form of Christianity that differed from the Nicene Christianity practiced by their subjects, leading to religious persecution and social tensions that undermined the stability of their state. The Vandal period was essentially a century-long case study in how not to run a conquered territory, providing plenty of material for future political science dissertations on administrative failure. During the Vandal period, independent kingdoms of largely Libyan character emerged in the mountainous and desert areas, with tribal groups maintaining various levels of Roman culture. Even before the Arab attacks began, the picture was one of continual decline of Latin civilization and the Latin language from most of the Maghreb except along the coastal fringes of Tunisia. The Vandal century had effectively begun the process of de-Romanization that would accelerate under subsequent rulers. The Byzantine revival came in 533 CE, when Emperor Justinian launched his reconquest of former Western Roman territories. General Belisarius led Byzantine forces in a swift campaign that recaptured Carthage after almost a century of Vandal rule, leading to the collapse of the entire Vandal kingdom. Byzantine rule in North Africa spanned around 175 years. The reconquest made Eastern Roman markets accessible again for African products, and Justinian began ambitious building projects. Through fortress building programs, the Byzantines created conditions for consolidated rule despite constant challenges from various Berber groups and internal unrest. The Byzantines also had to contend with various Berber groups who had maintained independence during the Vandal period. The Maori had established kingdoms in the North African hinterlands among the inaccessible passages of the Atlas Mountains and on the edge between the fertile coastal zone and the Sahara Desert, raiding the agricultural plains and forcing Byzantine authorities to respond with military force. Finally, in 546 CE, Emperor Justinian sent General John Troglita, who defeated the Moors in a series of battles, ending a long period of violent unrest. The most serious long-term damage came from nomadic Luata from the Libyan desert, who on several occasions penetrated far into Tunisia. By the 6th century CE, the basilica in Leptis Magna was converted into a Christian church, and the reduced urban area was protected by a defensive wall. During the decade 565 to 578 CE, Christian missionaries from Leptis Magna even moved among the Berber tribes as far south as the Fezzan and converted the Garamantes, which must have been one of history's more challenging evangelical missions. The Byzantine reconquest was the most enduring of all Justinian's western conquests, as while the Lombards established their kingdom in parts of Italy after 568 CE, and Byzantine rule in southern Spain ended amid the final Roman-Persian wars, the Maghreb remained entirely in Eastern Roman hands until the Arab conquest. Libya had become the most important cornerstone of Byzantine power in the west, though this distinction would prove temporary as new forces gathered in the Arabian Peninsula. Little is known of the Byzantine period in the Maghreb after Justinian's death in 565 CE, but Africa shows numerous examples of massive church building and re-establishment of Christian orthodoxy, though surviving Donatists were inevitably persecuted. By the time of the Arab conquest, around 647 CE, Leptis Magna was mostly abandoned except for a Byzantine garrison force and a population of less than 1,000 inhabitants. The Roman and Byzantine periods had transformed Libya from a collection of ancient kingdoms into integrated provinces of Mediterranean empires. Roman engineering, law, and urban planning had created a sophisticated provincial society that produced emperors, philosophers, and saints. The ruins that dot Libya's landscape today, the magnificent theatres, forums, basilicas, and harbours, testify to centuries when this desert-edge land was among the Mediterranean's most prosperous regions. Yet the end was approaching. The military forces sent from Constantinople to stem the coming invasion would prove ultimately inadequate, though Arab conquest could not be secure until Carthage was captured and destroyed, and reinforcements by sea interdicted. The most determined resistance to the Arabs would come from nomadic Libyan tribes living around the Ores Mountains, continuing Libya's ancient tradition of fierce independence that had challenged Romans, Vandals, and Byzantines alike. As we conclude this chapter of Libya's Roman and Byzantine centuries, we can almost see the ghosts of togaed senators walking through Leptis Magna's marble forums. Hear the cheers echoing from amphitheatres where gladiators once fought, and imagine the bustle of merchants loading olive oil onto ships bound for Rome. The classical world had claimed Libya as one of its brightest jewels, transforming ancient Berber lands into showcases of Mediterranean civilization. But change was coming from the east, carrying new ideas, new faith, and new ways of organizing society. Tomorrow, we'll discover how Islam would revolutionize Libya once again. But that's another story for another section of our journey through this remarkable land. Chapter 3: Islamic Conquest and Medieval Dynasties. Welcome back to our continuing journey through Libya's remarkable history. As we left our Byzantine chapter, we saw the classical world beginning to crumble under pressure from various forces, but none as transformative as what came next. Tonight, we witness one of history's most dramatic and swift conquests, as the new faith of Islam swept across North Africa like wildfire, bringing with it new ideas, new ways of organizing society, and a completely different vision of how the world should work. So settle back comfortably as we explore how Libya became part of one of history's most successful and far-reaching civilizations. The Islamic conquest of Libya was part of one of the most dramatic movements of any people in history, the Arab expansion of the 7th century. When Muhammad died in 632 CE, only the western half of Arabia was Muslim. Just 2 years later, the entire Arabian Peninsula had been brought to the faith, and Muslim armies were moving into the desert between Syria and Mesopotamia. By 642 CE, Arab armies controlled Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Syria, had invaded Armenia, and were concluding their conquest of the Persian Empire. The speed of this expansion was breathtaking, like watching a map being painted in real time, except with considerably more camels and significantly less concern about international borders. The first Arab military expeditions into Libya began in 642 CE, when Amr ibn al-As, an Arab general under Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, conquered Cyrenaica and established his headquarters at Barca. Amr ibn al-As was quite possibly history's most successful freelance military contractor, having already conquered Egypt largely on his own initiative. He was described as a skilled tactician who made advantageous use of the nomads in his ranks, seasoned in hit-and-run tactics, while his settled troops were more acquainted with siege warfare. His cavalry-dominated army moved through Egypt's deserts and oases with relative ease, which made the transition to Libyan terrain practically seamless. The conquest of Cyrenaica was remarkably swift, because Byzantine control over Libya was already extremely tenuous, restricted to a few poorly defended coastal strongholds. The local population, especially monophysite Christians who had been persecuted by the Byzantines, often welcomed the Arab invaders. The Arabs encountered little resistance as they moved westward, which must have been refreshingly anticlimactic after the prolonged sieges required to take heavily fortified Egyptian cities. Sometimes the best military strategy is showing up when your opponent has already given up. 2 years later, in 644 CE, Amr moved into Tripolitania, consolidating Arab control by the decade's end. The siege of Tripoli produced an unusual victory when 7 soldiers accidentally discovered an unwalled section while hunting. They infiltrated the city shouting "Takbir," causing confusion that led Byzantine defenders to assume the entire Muslim army was inside, prompting them to flee to their ships. The city was essentially handed over due to what amounted to psychological warfare by very lost hunters. In 647 CE, a larger expedition of 40,000 Arabs led by Abdallah ibn Sa'd penetrated further into western Libya. The 15-month campaign captured several cities including Sufetula, where Exarch Gregory was killed. Gregory's successor quickly negotiated tribute payments, demonstrating that discretion is the better part of valor when facing a proven conquering army. The Islamic expansion into Libya brought complete transformation of society, culture, and religious life. The Arabs introduced new administrative systems, trade networks, and architectural styles, though Libya's social and linguistic character remained overwhelmingly Berber for centuries. Most Berbers converted slowly to Islam while maintaining cultural traditions, creating a unique synthesis of Arab, Islamic, and indigenous elements. Under Uqba ibn Nafi, Arab control extended into Fezzan in 663 CE, ending the ancient Garamantian kingdom. Uqba became legendary in Islamic historiography, reportedly exclaiming near the Atlantic, "Lord God, bear witness were I not stopped by the sea I would conquer more lands for thy sake," which sounds like either sainthood material or megalomania, depending on your audience. The early period of Islamic rule in Libya was marked by relative administrative simplicity compared to the complex bureaucratic systems that would develop later. In 750 CE, the Abbasid dynasty overthrew the Umayyad Caliph and shifted the Islamic world's capital from Damascus to Baghdad, with local emirs retaining nominal control over the Libyan coast on behalf of the now very distant caliph. This marked the beginning of a pattern that would characterize much of Libya's subsequent medieval history. Official allegiance to distant imperial centres combined with significant local autonomy, which is essentially the ancient equivalent of modern federal systems, but with more poetry and considerably more colourful clothing. In 800 CE, Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the legendary ruler of the Arabian Nights stories, appointed Ibrahim ibn al-Aghlab as his governor, establishing the Aghlabid dynasty that would rule from Kairouan in modern Tunisia. The Aghlabids officially governed on behalf of the Abbasids, but were effectively independent rulers who controlled Ifriqiya, the Arabic name for the region that included Libya, Tunisia, and parts of Algeria. The Aghlabids adhered to Hanafi Sunni Islam with Mu'tazilite rationalist theology, and they sponsored impressive construction projects including the rebuilding of the Great Mosque of Kairouan, developing an architectural style that combined Abbasid and Byzantine influences. The Aghlabids were major builders whose monuments survive as some of North Africa's oldest Islamic-era structures, including military fortifications and practical infrastructure. Their architecture had a heavy fortress-like appearance reflecting uncertain political times when rulers needed to be prepared for attacks from multiple directions. Their building style essentially said, "We're here to stay, and we're not taking chances." However, the Aghlabid period saw new challenges from Ismaili Shia missionaries operating among Berber populations. The decline began when the movement gained momentum among the Kutama Berbers, led by Abu Abdallah al-Shi'i, who converted entire tribal confederations to the Fatimid cause. The Kutama proved perfect for revolutionary activity, being both militarily capable and receptive to messages promising social and political change. The Fatimid Revolution represented one of the most successful examples of early Islamic political insurgency, combining religious ideology with military organization and broad-based popular support. Between 902 and 909 CE, Abu Abdallah al-Shi'i led Kutama forces in systematically conquering Aghlabid territories, first capturing cities like Mila and Setif, then advancing on Kairouan itself. On March 25, 909 CE, Abu Abdallah entered the Aghlabid palace city of Raqqada in triumph, ending over a century of Aghlabid rule. The establishment of the Fatimid Caliphate marked a dramatic shift in North African politics and religion. The Fatimids claimed descent from Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, and her husband Ali, making them Shia rivals to the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Abdallah al-Mahdi Billah became the first Fatimid caliph in 909 CE, initially establishing his capital at Raqqada, before founding the new city of al-Mahdiya in 921 CE on a narrow peninsula along the Mediterranean coast, chosen primarily for its defensive advantages. The city of al-Mahdiya was a marvel of medieval urban planning, with walls 8.3 meters thick that made it virtually impenetrable by land. The Fatimids had learned from previous conquests that controlling the sea was just as important as controlling the land, so they inherited and expanded the Aghlabid navy, making al-Mahdiya both a fortress and a major naval base. The city became the launching point for Fatimid expansion across the Mediterranean, essentially serving as the medieval equivalent of a strategic military-industrial complex, but with better architecture and more philosophical discussions about the nature of divine authority. Under the Fatimids, Libya became part of an empire that stretched from Morocco to Egypt, and at various times included Sicily, parts of Syria, and even the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The Fatimids were remarkably tolerant rulers for their time, allowing Sunni Muslims, Christians and Jews freedom of worship and awarding civil offices based on merit rather than religion or family status. This progressive approach to governance helped maintain stability across their diverse territories, though it occasionally created tensions with more orthodox Muslim populations who expected their rulers to be more religiously exclusive. In 969 CE, during the reign of the fourth Fatimid Caliph al-Mu'izz li-Din Allah, the Fatimids achieved their greatest triumph by conquering Egypt and establishing their new capital at Al-Qahira, Arabic for the Triumphant, which became known as Cairo. This conquest transformed the Fatimid state from a North African power into one of the great empires of the medieval Islamic world. The shift of the capital to Cairo marked the beginning of a new phase in Fatimid history, but it also meant that Libya increasingly became a peripheral province rather than a core territory. The difficulty of maintaining control over Libya plagued the Fatimids just as it had almost every other authority preceding them, which suggests that Libya's geography and social structure created inherent challenges for imperial administration. Libya's vast distances, diverse population, and position between various power centres made it naturally resistant to centralised control. The Fatimids appointed local governors to manage Libyan affairs, but these officials often had to balance competing loyalties between the distant Fatimid court, local tribal leaders, and their own political survival. During the 11th century, Fatimid control over Libya became increasingly nominal. In 1045 CE, under Al-Mu'izz ibn Badis, the Zirids split from the Fatimid Caliphate, and in 1051 CE, the Emir of Barsa, Jabara ibn Mukhtar, acknowledged Zirid suzerainty rather than Fatimid authority. This fragmentation reflected broader patterns across the Islamic world, where distant provinces increasingly asserted local autonomy while maintaining nominal allegiance to imperial centres. It was becoming clear that the age of unified Islamic empires was giving way to an era of regional powers. The medieval period also saw increased Corsair activity along the Libyan coast, as various rulers used privateering as both an economic strategy and a form of naval warfare. Cyrenaica became a base for pirates who often acted as privateers for the Fatimids and later for other powers, attacking Byzantine and Italian shipping while bringing wealth to their local sponsors. This maritime raiding was essentially the medieval equivalent of state-sponsored entrepreneurship, except with significantly higher mortality rates and considerably fewer legal safeguards. In 1146 CE, Tripoli was pillaged by the Italo-Normans, demonstrating that Libya remained vulnerable to attack from various directions. The Norman raid was part of broader Mediterranean conflicts between Christian and Muslim powers, but it also highlighted the limitations of local defensive capabilities. Libya's long coastline and relatively small urban centres made it difficult to defend against naval attacks, a strategic weakness that would persist for centuries. The Almohad period brought changes when supporters arrived in Tripoli from Morocco in 1158 CE. The Almohads were a Berber dynasty that had conquered northern Africa as far as Libya and Al-Andalus. They represented a puritanical Islamic revival, emphasizing strict monotheism, quite different from the tolerant Fatimid approach. The name Almohad means those who affirm the unity of God, reflecting their theological emphasis. They legitimized conquests by accusing previous dynasties of religious laxity, conducting ideological warfare alongside military campaigns. Their conquest was particularly brutal, as they considered it legal to kill non-believers. Between 1149 and 1150 CE, Abdul-Mu'min conducted the examination, providing lists of people to be killed among rebellious tribes, essentially deadly performance reviews. Despite harsh methods, the Almohads left lasting contributions, including impressive architectural monuments. Their rule coincided with intellectual developments, though overshadowed by religious intolerance. The empire began fragmenting after their defeat at Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212 CE by Christian forces, marking the beginning of their end, though they continued ruling parts of North Africa until 1269 CE. The medieval Islamic period in Libya demonstrates important patterns that would persist throughout the region's history. Libya's position between power centres made it subject to competing influences. The geography and social structure created challenges for centralised administration, leading to nominal imperial authority with significant local autonomy. Libya's strategic position made it valuable to empires, but vulnerable to attack by whoever controlled superior military forces. The Islamic conquest and medieval period transformed Libya in ways that persist today. Arabic became the dominant administrative and cultural language, though Berber languages survived. Islam became the dominant religion, creating new social organization. New architectural styles, legal systems, and educational institutions were established. Trade networks expanded, connecting Libya to the broader Islamic world from Spain to Central Asia. Perhaps most importantly, the Islamic period established Libya's identity as part of the larger Arabic and Islamic cultural sphere, while demonstrating the challenges of governing this vast territory. The medieval dynasties, Aghlabids, Fatimids, Zirids, and Almohads, each contributed to Libya's development while illustrating the difficulties of maintaining stable control over such a geographically and socially complex region. As we conclude our exploration of Libya's Islamic conquest and medieval dynasties, we can almost hear the call to prayer echoing from newly built mosques. See merchants conducting business in Arabic alongside traditional Berber languages, and imagine scholars debating theology in the madrasas of Kairouan and Cairo. The Islamic period had fundamentally transformed Libya, creating new institutions, new forms of cultural expression, and new connections to the wider world. But change was constant, and new challenges were already emerging from both the north and the east. Tomorrow, we'll discover how the Ottoman Empire would reshape Libya once again. But that's another chapter in our ongoing journey through this remarkable land's rich and complex history. Chapter 4: Ottoman Rule and Italian Colonization. Welcome back to our continuing exploration of Libya's remarkable journey through time. As we left the medieval Islamic period, we saw the fragmentation of great empires and the rise of local powers across the Mediterranean world. Tonight, we witness how Libya would be swept up in the grand struggles between empires, first becoming part of the vast Ottoman domain, then experiencing one of the most dramatic colonial conquests of the early 20th century. So settle back comfortably as we explore how external powers continue to shape this strategic crossroads, bringing both prosperity and suffering to the people of Libya. The Ottoman conquest of Libya began in the 16th century, but not as a single, coordinated campaign. Rather, it unfolded in stages that reflected the complex political situation in the Mediterranean, where Spanish Habsburgs, Ottoman Turks, and various local powers competed for control of strategic positions. By the early 1500s, the Libyan coast had minimal central authority, and its harbours had become havens for unchecked bands of pirates, making the region ripe for foreign intervention by whoever could bring the most effective force to bear on the situation. The Spanish had occupied Tripoli in 1510, but were more concerned with controlling the port than administering a colony, which is a remarkably modern approach to strategic thinking. In 1530, the city was ceded to the Knights of St. John as compensation for their expulsion from Rhodes. This essentially meant Libya was being used as a consolation prize in Mediterranean power struggles, like a participation trophy with actual governing responsibilities. Christian rule lasted until 1551, when Tripoli was conquered by Ottoman admirals Sinan Pasha and Turgut Reis. Turgut Reis, declared Pasha of Tripoli, proved exceptionally capable, receiving submission from interior tribes and cities like Misrata, Zuwara, and Garian. These efforts helped establish state foundations in modern Libya, though Constantinople's control remained loose. The Ottoman conquest was not merely a military operation, but part of a broader effort to liberate Muslim territories from Christian control. When Libyans sought help from the Ottoman Empire in 1551, they were appealing to what was then considered the Islamic Caliphate. The Ottoman administration sent Murad Aga with a mighty fleet and thousands of soldiers to Tajura, an eastern suburb of Tripoli, where he waged relentless combat against the Crusaders. The siege proved difficult due to the massive defensive fortifications, but when Turgut Reis arrived with reinforcements and imposed a blockade, the Christian defenders finally surrendered in August 1551. After 1565, administrative authority was vested in a pasha appointed by the Sultan. However, the Janissaries quickly became dominant, collecting taxes while Barbary Corsairs provided income through privateering. As a self-governing military guild, the Janissaries reduced the pasha to a ceremonial role. In 1611, local chiefs conducted a coup and appointed Suleiman Safar as DE, beginning rule by military strongmen rather than civilian administrators. During the 18th century, Ottoman power waned throughout North Africa, with the sultans ending the practice of sending pashas to Tripoli, Algiers, and Tunis. The title of pasha began to assume hereditary status, effectively creating autonomous dynasties that paid nominal tribute to the Ottoman Empire while conducting their own foreign and domestic policies. This decentralization reflected broader patterns across the Ottoman Empire, where distant provinces increasingly operated independently while maintaining formal allegiance to the Sultan. The most significant development in Libya's Ottoman period came in 1711, when Ahmed Karamanli, an Ottoman cavalry officer and son of a Turkish officer and Libyan woman, seized power and founded the Karamanli dynasty that would last 124 years. Ahmed was a Janissary and popular cavalry officer who murdered the Ottoman Dey of Tripolitania and seized the throne in what became known as the 1711 Karamanli coup. After persuading Sultan Ahmed III to recognize him as governor, Ahmed established himself as pasha and made his post hereditary. essentially creating an independent kingdom that paid nominal tribute to the Ottoman Empire. Though Tripolitania continued to recognize nominal Ottoman suzerainty, it otherwise acted as an independent kingdom under Ahmed Karamanli's rule from 1711 to 1745. Ahmed greatly expanded his city's economy, particularly through the employment of Corsairs on crucial Mediterranean shipping routes. Nations that wished to protect their ships from the Corsairs were forced to pay tribute to the Pasha, creating a protection racket that was both highly profitable and internationally recognized. This was essentially state-sponsored piracy with diplomatic immunity, which was apparently a viable business model in the 18th century. The Karamanli dynasty's most famous ruler was Yusuf ibn Ali Karamanli, who reigned from 1795 to 1832 and became internationally known for fighting a war with the United States between 1801 and 1805. In 1801, Pasha Yusuf Karamanli demanded from the United States an increase in the tribute to $225,000, which the Americans had been paying since 1796 for protection of their commerce from Barbary pirates under the Treaty of Tripoli. When the demand was refused by President Thomas Jefferson, who was confident in the ability of the new United States Navy to protect American shipping, Pasha Yusuf unofficially declared war in May 1801 by chopping down the flagpole before the American consulate, which was probably the most dramatically symbolic way to declare war in diplomatic history. Jefferson responded by ordering the U.S. Navy into the Mediterranean, successfully blockading Tripolitania's harbours in 1803. This conflict became known as the First Barbary War and marked one of the first overseas military operations of the young United States. The war featured several memorable incidents, including the capture of the USS Philadelphia, which gave the Karamanlis a significant naval prize, and the famous Battle of Derna, where American Marines fought alongside Arab allies in the first time the American flag flew over foreign soil. After some initial military successes, Yusuf found himself threatened with invasion by American ground forces following the reinstatement of his deposed brother, Hamet Karamanli, who was recruited by American Army officer William Eaton. On June 10, 1805, Yusuf signed the Treaty of Peace and Amity, ending the war. The phrase "to the shores of Tripoli" in the Marines' hymn commemorates this campaign. By 1819, the various treaties of the Napoleonic Wars had forced the Barbary states to give up piracy almost entirely, and Tripolitania's economy began to crumble. Yusuf attempted to compensate for lost revenue by encouraging the trans-Saharan slave trade, but with abolitionist sentiment on the rise in Europe and the United States, this failed to salvage Tripolitania's economy. As Yusuf weakened, factions formed around his three sons, and though Yusuf abdicated in 1832 in favour of his son Ali II, civil war soon resulted. Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II sent troops ostensibly to restore order, but instead deposed and exiled Ali II, marking the end of both the Karamanli dynasty and an independent Tripolitania in 1835. Direct Ottoman rule was reimposed after the Ottoman Revolt of Tripolitania, a revolt by tribal leaders against Central Ottoman rule that continued until 1858 with the death of Guma al-Mahmudi, who along with Abd al-Jalil had led the resistance. Libya remained under direct Ottoman control until the Italian invasion of 1911. The Italian conquest began with the Italo-Turkish War of 1911 to 1912. Italy's colonial ambitions had been frustrated by French expansion in Tunisia, so Libya became the fallback option. Italian media depicted Libya as mineral-rich, well-watered, and defended by only 4,000 Ottoman troops. The population was described as hostile to Ottomans and friendly to Italians, with invasion characterized as a military walk. this optimistic assessment proved spectacularly incorrect. Using the pretext of protecting Italian interests, Italy issued an ultimatum on September 28, 1911, and declared war the next day. Italian forces quickly occupied coastal towns but met unexpected resistance, confining operations to coastal areas while the interior remained under Ottoman control. The war introduced technological firsts, including aerial reconnaissance and bombing, with Lieutenant Gavotti dropping bombs while pulling pins with his teeth. In May 1912, Italian naval forces occupied Rhodes and some of the Dodecanese Islands to pressure the Ottomans, and by October 1912, Turkey, now menaced by the Balkan states, sought peace. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed on October 18, 1912, formalized Ottoman recognition of Italian control over Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. However, Italian control over much of the interior remained ineffective, with resistance continuing throughout the region. The outbreak of the First World War forced Italy to bring troops back to Europe, while the Ottoman proclamation of jihad and uprisings by Libyans forced the Italians to abandon most occupied territory and entrench themselves mainly in Tripoli, Benghazi, Derna, and other coastal towns. Italian control over the interior remained minimal until the late 1920s, when the situation would change dramatically under Benito Mussolini's fascist government, which took a much more aggressive approach to colonial administration. After Mussolini's rise in 1922, Italian colonial policy transformed with a brutal pacification campaign. Generals Pietro Badoglio and Rodolfo Graziani waged bloody campaigns against Libyan resistance, particularly in Cyrenaica, where the Senussi Confederation provided organised opposition under Omar al-Mukhtar. Graziani accepted his commission on condition that he could crush resistance unencumbered by Italian or international law. Methods included illegal chemical weapons, mass civilian executions, and concentration camps. 100,000 Cyrenaicans were forcibly expelled. Graziani destroyed oasis wells, slaughtered livestock, and built a barbed wire barrier 320 kilometers along the Egyptian border to prevent al-Mukhtar from using Egypt as sanctuary. The resistance finally ended with the capture and execution of Omar al-Mukhtar on September 15, 1931. The Italians assembled 20,000 Arabs to witness his hanging, intending to demonstrate the futility of further resistance. By the mid-1930s, the Libyan population had been cut in half due to emigration, famine, and war casualties. Estimates suggest that between 40,000 and 70,000 Libyans died in concentration camps alone, making the Italian conquest one of the more brutal colonial campaigns of the early 20th century. In 1934, Italy merged Tripolitania and Cyrenaica into the single colony of Italian Libya, adopting the ancient Greek name for the region. Some 150,000 Italians settled in Libya, constituting roughly 20% of the total population by the time of the Second World War. Italian colonial administration introduced modern infrastructure, including roads, hospitals and schools, but these developments primarily served the Italian settler population rather than indigenous Libyans. The Italian colonial period came to an end during the Second World War, when British forces, supported by Free French troops, captured Tripoli in January 1943 and Benghazi in November 1942. Libya became a crucial theatre in the North African campaign, with battles between British Empire forces and the German Afrika Korps ranging across the desert. The defeat of Axis forces at El Alamein in October 1942 marked the beginning of the end for Italian rule in Libya. From 1943 to 1951, Libya remained under Allied occupation, with the British administering Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, while the French controlled Fezzan. Under the terms of the 1947 Paris Peace Treaty, Italy relinquished all claims to Libya, and the territory began its journey toward independence. The United Nations General Assembly approved a resolution on November 21, 1949, calling for Libyan independence by January 1, 1952. The Ottoman and Italian periods in Libya's history demonstrate several important themes that would continue to shape the region's development. First, Libya's strategic position made it valuable to various imperial powers, but its geography and social structure continued to create challenges for effective centralized administration. Second, external powers repeatedly underestimated the complexity of governing Libya and the strength of local resistance to foreign control. Third, the region's economy remained heavily dependent on its position in Mediterranean trade networks and trans-Saharan commerce. Perhaps most significantly, both the Ottoman and Italian periods saw attempts to create unified administrative structures that brought together Tripolitania, Cyrenaica, and Fezzan under single governmental systems. While these efforts were often imposed from outside and met with varying degrees of local resistance, they established precedents for treating these regions as parts of a single political entity that would later become the independent nation of Libya. The human cost of these imperial adventures was enormous, particularly during the Italian colonial period when systematic repression and forced displacement devastated local populations. The legacy of colonial violence would influence Libyan political development for generations, creating patterns of resistance to central authority and suspicion of external intervention that would persist long after independence. Yet these difficult periods also demonstrated the resilience and determination of Libyan communities in maintaining their cultural identity and fighting for their independence. Chapter 5: Independence, Gaddafi Era, and Modern Struggles. Welcome back to our journey through Libya's complex and often turbulent modern history. As we concluded the previous chapter with Italian colonial rule ending in Allied occupation during the Second World War, tonight we witness Libya's emergence as an independent nation and its transformation under one of the 20th century's most controversial leaders. This is the story of how Libya gained independence through the United Nations, experienced rapid economic transformation through oil wealth, endured 4 decades of authoritarian rule, and then plunged into the chaos that continues to shape its destiny today. So settle back as we explore Libya's most dramatic and consequential period, from the hopeful independence of 1951 through the revolutionary upheaval of 2011 and beyond. Libya's path to independence was unique. When the country declared independence on December 24, 1951, it became the first nation to achieve independence through the United Nations. The UN General Assembly resolution gave Libya just over 2 years to prepare for self-governance after centuries of foreign rule. Sayyid Muhammad Idris al-Senussi, Emir of Cyrenaica and grandson of the Senussi order founder, became king. His religious credentials and resistance to Italian rule made him ideal for unifying Tripolitania, Cyrenaica and Fezzan. Speaking by radio from Benghazi, King Idris proclaimed, "We proclaim to the people of Libya that our beloved country has, with the help of God, attained independence. The new kingdom's prospects were not encouraging no industry, minimal agriculture, exporting mainly hides, wool, horses and ostrich feathers." Libya in 1951 combined one of the world's lowest per capita income figures with one of the highest illiteracy rates globally. The new kingdom was established as a federal system to address regional rivalries, with Cyrenaica and Fezzan wanting federalism because they feared being dominated by Tripolitania, which contained most of the population. This created the unusual arrangement where Benghazi and Tripoli had to alternate as capital cities every 2 years, which was probably the only government in history that literally moved house on a regular schedule like a travelling circus. The Kingdom of Libya was a constitutional monarchy, but King Idris wielded substantial influence over parliament and maintained absolute control over the army. Political parties were banned after the first general election in 1952, when the National Congress Party campaigned against federalism and was subsequently defeated and outlawed. The government became what historians describe as an oligarchy of wealthy townsmen and powerful tribal leaders, with provincial ties remaining more important than national ones. Libya's transformation from one of the world's poorest nations to one of its wealthiest occurred with remarkable speed after the discovery of oil. In 1959, much larger oil reserves were discovered, which helped transform Libya into one of the richest countries in the world, as measured by per capita income. Whereas per capita annual income in 1951 had been $25 to $35, by 1969 it had reached $2,000, representing one of the most dramatic economic transformations in modern history. The 1955 petroleum law created competitive conditions that enabled small oil companies to drill alongside larger corporations, with low entry fees and rents that only increased significantly after the 8th year of drilling. This prevented any single company from becoming crucial to Libya's oil operations, though it had the downside of incentivizing companies to extract as much oil as quickly as possible. Libya's oil fields fueled rapidly growing demand in Europe, and by 1967 the country was supplying a third of all oil entering the West European market, making it the world's 4th largest oil producer. King Idris used this newfound wealth to maintain close alliances with the United States and United Kingdom, both of which maintained military bases in Libya. The most important US installation was Wheelus Air Base near Tripoli, considered strategically valuable during the Cold War. In 1953, Libya concluded a 20-year treaty of friendship and alliance with Britain, and the following year signed a similar agreement with the United States, exchanging base rights for economic aid. However, by 1964, the government bowed to growing anti-Western sentiment in the Arab world and ordered the evacuation of American and British bases. King Idris abolished Libya's federal system on April 26, 1963, concentrating all economic and administrative planning at the national level and renaming the country from the United Kingdom of Libya to simply the Kingdom of Libya. This centralization allowed all taxes and oil revenues to flow directly to the central government, but the reform was unpopular among Libya's provinces, which saw their power curtailed. According to historian Dirk van der Wal, this change was the single most critical political act during the monarchy's tenure in office. By the mid-1960s, several factors were undermining King Idris's rule. The government faced accusations of corruption and cronyism, with growing resentment over the concentration of oil wealth in the hands of the elite. Arab nationalism was rising throughout the region, and Idris drew criticism for his close ties with the West and his support for Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. The aging king increasingly retreated from active governance, and by 1969, some observers suggested he was planning his own abdication. On September 1st, 1969, while King Idris was in Turkey for medical treatment, 27-year-old Captain Muammar Gaddafi led the Free Officers movement in a bloodless coup. Born in a Bedouin tent in 1942, Gaddafi was an ardent Arab nationalist who had plotted the monarchy's overthrow since military academy. The Revolutionary Command Council proclaimed the Libyan Arab Republic with the motto, "Freedom, Socialism and Unity," ending what Gaddafi called the reactionary and corrupt regime. Gaddafi quickly moved to implement his vision of revolutionary change. In 1970, he removed US and British military bases and expelled most members of Libya's Italian and Jewish communities. He outlawed alcoholic beverages and gambling in accordance with Islamic principles, while nationalizing foreign-owned petroleum assets in 1973. These actions were part of his broader anti-Western stance, though they were also pragmatic moves to increase Libya's control over its own resources and reduce foreign influence. The early years of Gaddafi's rule saw significant social programs funded by oil revenues, including free public education, healthcare and housing projects. Per capita income rose to more than $11,000 in nominal terms and over $30,000 in purchasing power parity terms, making Libya the fifth highest income country in Africa. However, Gaddafi systematically destroyed civil society by prohibiting political parties, independent trade unions, and other civil organizations while filling sensitive positions with members of his own tribe and allied groups. Gaddafi's foreign policy was characterized by support for various revolutionary movements worldwide and persistent attempts to unite Arab countries under his leadership. He financed organizations ranging from Palestinian guerrillas and Irish Republican Army fighters to Philippine Muslim rebels and African liberation movements. His government was implicated in several international terrorist incidents, including allegedly providing training and funding for groups that conducted attacks in Europe and elsewhere. In 1973, Gaddafi initiated what he called a popular revolution with the formation of basic people's congresses, presented as a system of direct democracy, but designed to maintain his personal control over major decisions. By 1977, he had transformed Libya into what he termed a Jamahiriya, an Arabic neologism meaning state of the masses, though in reality power remained concentrated in his hands and those of the Revolutionary Command, Council. The 1980s marked a period of increasing international isolation for Libya due to Gaddafi's support for terrorism and radical movements. US-Libya relations deteriorated severely, with President Reagan imposing a full oil embargo and sanctions. In April 1986, American warplanes bombed Tripoli and Benghazi in retaliation for alleged Libyan involvement in terrorist attacks, an operation that killed several civilians, including reportedly one of Gaddafi's adopted daughters. The bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in December 1988, allegedly by Libyan intelligence agents, led to comprehensive UN sanctions in 1992 when Gaddafi refused to surrender the suspects. These sanctions severely limited Libya's ability to sell oil and purchase foreign goods, contributing to economic stagnation and internal pressure for change. The sanctions remained in place until 1999, when Libya finally agreed to hand over the Lockerbie suspects for trial. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Gaddafi began a gradual rehabilitation in international relations. Libya officially renounced terrorism and agreed to compensate victims of past attacks. In 2003, Gaddafi announced that Libya would abandon its weapons of mass destruction programs, leading to the lifting of UN sanctions and gradual normalization of relations with Western countries. By 2009, he was elected chairman of the African Union and gave his first speech to the UN General Assembly. Despite this international rehabilitation, domestic conditions in Libya remained problematic. While oil wealth had provided substantial social benefits, corruption was widespread and political freedoms remained severely limited. Libya lacked independent institutions, civil society organizations and democratic processes. Power was increasingly concentrated among Gaddafi's family members and tribal allies, while ordinary Libyans had no meaningful voice in their government despite the theoretical system of people's congresses. The Arab Spring reached Libya on February 15, 2011, with anti-government rallies in Benghazi. Unlike peaceful transitions elsewhere, Libya's uprising became immediately violent. By March, rebel forces controlled eastern Libya and formed the National Transitional Council, but Gaddafi's forces counterattacked, threatening Benghazi. UN Security Council Resolution 1973 authorized all necessary measures to protect civilians, leading to NATO intervention that began March 19th, with comprehensive bombing campaigns lasting 8 months. NATO's intervention proved decisive in the rebels' eventual victory, though the campaign lasted far longer than initially expected. Gaddafi's forces were unable to shoot down any NATO aircraft despite possessing extensive anti-aircraft systems, demonstrating the technological superiority of the Western military alliance. However, the intervention also prolonged the conflict and increased casualty figures compared to what might have occurred without international involvement. By August 2011, rebel forces had launched a final offensive that captured Tripoli, though Gaddafi himself evaded capture and retreated to his hometown of Sirte. The dictator's regime finally collapsed on October 20th, 2011, when NATO airstrikes targeted his escape convoy and he was subsequently captured and killed by rebel fighters. His death marked the end of 42 years of authoritarian rule and the beginning of Libya's current period of instability. The aftermath of Gaddafi's overthrow quickly demonstrated the challenges of post-conflict reconstruction in a country lacking strong institutions. The National Transitional Council proclaimed Libya's liberation, but hundreds of armed militias that had fought against Gaddafi refused to disarm or integrate into a national army. These groups, representing different regions, tribes, and ideological orientations, became the dominant political actors in the new Libya. Libya's post-Gaddafi governments have struggled to establish control over the country's territory, resources, and armed groups. The weakness of central authority, combined with the proliferation of weapons from Gaddafi's arsenals, created conditions for ongoing violence and territorial fragmentation. Different militias have controlled various cities and oil installations, using their leverage to extract concessions from whoever claims to represent the national government. In 2014, renewed fighting broke out between rival coalitions of militias and political factions, leading to a second civil war that divided Libya between competing governments in Tripoli and eastern Libya. This conflict has involved regional powers supporting different sides, with countries like Egypt, the UAE, Russia, and Turkey providing military assistance to their preferred factions. The result has been a prolonged stalemate that has prevented effective governance and reconstruction. Libya's oil industry, which provides nearly all government revenue, has been repeatedly disrupted by armed groups blockading production facilities or fighting for control of installations. Despite having Africa's largest proven oil reserves, Libya's output has frequently fallen to a fraction of its pre-2011 levels. The economic impact has been severe, with GDP contracting dramatically and living standards declining for most Libyans. The collapse of state authority has also created humanitarian crises, including the emergence of human trafficking networks that exploit migrants attempting to reach Europe via Libya's Mediterranean coast. The absence of effective border controls has allowed various criminal and terrorist groups to operate in Libyan territory, creating security threats that extend well beyond Libya's borders to neighbouring countries and Europe. International efforts to resolve Libya's crisis have met with limited success, though a ceasefire agreement reached in October 2020 has provided some stability. The fundamental challenge remains the absence of legitimate institutions capable of exercising authority throughout the country. Without resolution of the underlying political and security issues, Libya continues to experience the consequences of the 2011 intervention and the broader collapse of governance that followed Gaddafi's overthrow. Libya's modern history illustrates both the possibilities and perils of rapid social and political transformation. The discovery of oil brought unprecedented wealth that could have been used to build strong institutions and diversified economy. Instead, authoritarian rule prevented the development of civil society and democratic governance, leaving the country vulnerable to violent upheaval when change finally came. The international intervention of 2011, while well-intentioned in its goal of protecting civilians, demonstrates the importance of planning for post-conflict reconstruction. The focus on military action without adequate attention to institution building and reconciliation contributed to the ongoing instability that has characterized Libya for over a decade since Gaddafi's fall. Chapter 6: Geography, Resources, and Cultural Identity. Welcome to our final exploration of Libya, where we turn from the dramatic sweep of history to examine the land itself and the remarkable people who call it home. After travelling through millennia of conquest, empire, and revolution, tonight we discover how geography has shaped destiny, how vast mineral wealth transformed a poor nation into one of the world's richest, and how diverse cultures have created Libya's unique identity. From the harsh beauty of the Sahara to the Mediterranean coastline, from the largest oil reserves in Africa to the complex tapestry of Arab, Berber, and nomadic peoples, this is Libya in all its geographic grandeur and cultural richness. So settle back one final time as we explore the land and people that have been the stage and players in this extraordinary historical drama. Libya is a country of immense geographic scale and stunning contrasts. As the fourth largest nation in Africa and the 17th largest in the world, Libya covers 1,759,540 square kilometres, roughly 7 times the size of the United Kingdom, and slightly larger than Alaska. This vast territory stretches from the Mediterranean Sea in the north to the heart of the Sahara Desert in the south, encompassing a landscape so diverse that different regions experience completely different climates and ecosystems, almost as if several countries had been stitched together by some ambitious geographic tailor. The Mediterranean coast represents Libya's most hospitable and populated region, where a narrow strip of semi-arid steppe extends inland from the Mediterranean climate of the Al Jafara Plain, the Nafusa Plateau, and the green mountain region of Cyrenaica. This coastal zone enjoys a temperate climate with hot, dry summers and cool, rainy winters, receiving between 400 to 600 millimeters of annual rainfall in the most favored locations. From October to March, prevailing westerly winds bring cyclonic storms and rains across northern Libya, creating the only conditions suitable for sustained agriculture in the entire country. Beyond this narrow coastal strip lies one of Earth's most formidable landscapes, the Libyan Desert, which covers approximately 90% of the country and represents one of the most arid and inhospitable regions on our planet. The Libyan Desert is part of the Greater Sahara and extends across 1,300,000 square kilometers, stretching approximately 1,100 kilometers from east to west and 1,000 kilometers from north to south, shaped roughly like a rectangle slanting toward the southeast. The climate of the Libyan desert features extreme temperature variations. Summer daytime temperatures regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius while dropping dramatically at night. Winter days average 27 degrees Celsius, but nighttime temperatures can plummet below freezing, with recorded lows of -9 degrees Celsius creating white nights when hoar frost forms across the desert landscape. The desert consists primarily of sand plains, dunes, ridges and depressions forming an endorheic region with no rivers. Notable features include the Aswad al-Harouj Black Desert, a volcanic shield region, and the Hamada al-Hamra Red Desert, a rocky plateau coloured by iron oxide deposits. In the southeast lies Jebel Arkanu with structures thought caused by meteorite strikes, and a field of Libyan desert glass used in Tutankhamun's ancient jewellery. The southern desert experiences some of the world's most extreme aridity, with Sabah recording an average of only 0.4 inches of precipitation annually, the highest degree of aridity ever measured. Many areas of the Sahara experience 200 consecutive rainless days per year, and some regions have not seen significant precipitation for several years running. This makes the Libyan desert one of the most rainless places on Earth, rivaling Chile's Atacama Desert for the dubious honour of ultimate dryness. Despite these harsh conditions, the desert supports scattered vegetation and wildlife adapted to extreme aridity. Desert rodents such as the desert hare and jerboa inhabit the region, along with hyenas, fennec foxes, red foxes, jackals, gazelles, and wildcats. The occasional oasis supports date palms and provides refuge for both wildlife and the small human populations that have learned to thrive in this challenging environment. Libya possesses the largest proven oil reserves in Africa at 48.4 billion barrels, representing 3% of global reserves and ranking 9th worldwide. Discovered in 1959, this transformed Libya from one of the world's poorest nations into one of its wealthiest. Libyan oil is particularly valuable due to its low sulfur content as sweet crude and proximity to European markets, with production costs as low as $1 per barrel. Oil production peaked at over 3 million barrels daily in the late 1960s, though political instability has caused fluctuations. Current production averages 1,245,000 barrels per day, with 85% exported to European markets. Libya also holds 53 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves, ranking 5th in Africa, primarily exported to Europe through the Green Stream pipeline to Italy. This extraordinary dependence on oil and gas revenues illustrates both the blessing and curse of Libya's natural resource wealth. While petroleum exports have provided enormous revenues that funded massive social programs, infrastructure development, and military expenditures during the Gaddafi era, they have also created what economists call a resource curse, an over-reliance on a single commodity that makes the economy vulnerable to price fluctuations and reduces incentives for economic diversification. Libya's strategic geographic location has been as important as its natural resources in shaping the country's historical development. Positioned at the midpoint of Africa's northern rim, Libya provides a crucial link between the Arab countries of North Africa and those of the Middle East, while lying within easy reach of major European nations. This location has made Libya's urban centres bustling crossroads rather than isolated outposts, though it has also made the country a target for various imperial ambitions throughout history. The Mediterranean coast provides Libya with a coastline of nearly 2,000 kilometres, offering multiple natural harbours and access to European markets. The country's land borders stretch for 4,348 kilometres, connecting Libya to 6 neighbouring countries: Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan, Chad, and Niger. These extensive borders have created both opportunities for trade and challenges for border control, particularly in the post-2011 period when central government authority weakened. Libya's vast territory encompasses several distinct geographic regions, each with its own characteristics and challenges. Tripolitania in the northwest contains the capital and most of the population. Cyrenaica in the northeast includes Libya's second-largest city, Benghazi, and Fezzan in the south covers the largest area but supports the smallest population due to its desert environment. These regional divisions have persisted throughout history and continue to influence Libya's political and social organisation. The country's cultural identity reflects this geographic diversity and the complex historical processes that have shaped Libyan society over millennia. Libya's population of approximately 7 million people represents a remarkable cultural mosaic that includes Arab, Berber, Tuareg, Tebu, and other ethnic groups, each contributing to the country's rich cultural heritage while maintaining their distinct identities and traditions. The Arab population, which forms the majority of Libya's inhabitants, traces their presence to the Islamic conquests of the 7th century, and particularly to the major migrations of the Banu Hilal and Banu Sulaim tribes in the 11th century. These Arab settlers brought Islam, the Arabic language, and cultural practices that eventually became dominant throughout much of the region. Today, Arabic serves as Libya's official language, with Libyan Arabic dialects varying significantly across different regions, while incorporating influences from Berber, Italian, and Turkish languages. The Amazigh, or Berbers, represent Libya's indigenous population and are considered the descendants of the earliest inhabitants of North Africa. Estimates suggest that between 236,000 and 590,000 Libyans, approximately 4 to 10% of the population, identify as Amazigh. They live primarily in western Libya near the borders with Tunisia and Algeria, with the largest Amazigh community in the Jebel Nafusa region and significant populations in towns like Zuwara, Ghadames, Sokna, Aljila, Al-Fukaha, and Jalu. The Amazigh retain their Tamazight languages and customs despite centuries of Arabization and are made up of different ethnic groups with their own distinct dialects and traditions. Most Amazigh adhere to Sunni Islam, though many in Jebel Nafusa belong to the Ibadi sect of Islam, which differs from the Maliki school of jurisprudence followed by most Libyan Arabs. The Amazigh languages, including Nafusi, Ghadamesi, and Awila, represent direct links to Libya's pre-Arab past and have experienced a cultural renaissance since 2011. In Libya's southwestern regions live the Tuareg, a traditionally nomadic Berber people known as the Blue People of the Desert, due to the indigo-dyed veils worn by men that sometimes stain their skin blue. The Tuareg speak Tamahak, a Berber language historically written using the ancient Tifinagh script, and are found primarily around Gat, Ubari, and areas near Ghadames in the Fezzan region. Their traditional economy combined pastoralism with control of trans-Saharan trade routes, making them crucial intermediaries in the exchange of goods between North and West Africa. Tuareg culture emphasizes poetry, oral storytelling, and craftsmanship, with traditional silver jewelry, leatherwork, and camel equipment representing important expressions of cultural identity. Despite their association with nomadism, many Tuareg have adopted more sedentary lifestyles while maintaining their cultural practices and clan-based social organization. Tuareg survival has long depended on sophisticated knowledge of desert environments, including seasonal movement patterns, water sources, and sustainable grazing practices that remain relevant for desert conservation today. The Tebu, also known as Tobu, represent another minority group primarily found in Libya's southeastern regions. They speak Tebu languages and traditionally practiced nomadic pastoralism, adapted to the harsh conditions of the Central Sahara. The name Tebu derives from the Kanuri language and means the man who lives in Tibesti, referring to the Tibesti Mountains that span the Libya-Chad border. The Tebu have historically controlled important oasis settlements and trade routes across the southern Sahara. Libya is also home to smaller communities, including the Haratin, descendants of West African populations who were historically brought to North Africa but have developed their own distinct cultural identity. They live in oasis communities throughout Libya and speak both Maghrebi Arabic dialects and various Berber languages. Additionally, There are communities of people known as Dom, sometimes called gypsies, who speak Domari, an Indo-European language, and maintain their own unique cultural traditions. The linguistic landscape of Libya reflects this cultural diversity, with Arabic serving as the official language, while numerous minority languages contribute to the country's rich linguistic heritage. Modern Standard Arabic is used in formal contexts such as education, media, and government, while spoken, Libyan Arabic varies considerably across regions. These regional dialects carry distinct characteristics that serve as markers of local identity and reflect the different historical influences that have shaped various parts of the country. Berber languages, particularly Nafusi in the Nafusa Mountains and Tamahak among the Tuareg, represent the preservation of Libya's pre-Islamic linguistic heritage. Despite decades of suppression under previous governments, these languages have experienced renewed interest and support in recent years. In 2013, a law recognized the rights of minorities to receive education in their mother tongues as a voluntary option, and schools have begun teaching Tamazight alongside Arabic. The influence of colonial languages remains visible in Libya's linguistic landscape, with Italian and English used in educational institutions, international business, and technical fields. French also appears in certain contexts, reflecting Libya's connections to neighbouring countries and international organisations. These foreign languages serve as bridges connecting Libya to the global community, while the indigenous languages maintain connections to the country's deep historical roots. Religion plays a central role in Libyan cultural identity, with Islam practiced by the vast majority of the population. Most Libyans follow Sunni Islam according to the Maliki school of jurisprudence, though there are small minorities practicing Ibadi Islam, particularly among some Amazigh communities in Cyrenaica. The influence of the Sanusiya, a 19th century Islamic brotherhood, remains strong in eastern Libya and continues to shape religious and social practices in the region. Islamic practices and beliefs permeate daily life in Libya, influencing everything from legal systems to social customs, dietary practices, and family organization. The mosque serves as both a religious and community center, while Islamic holidays and observances provide structure to the social calendar. However, Libyan Islam also incorporates pre-Islamic traditions and local customs, creating distinctive regional variations that reflect the country's diverse cultural heritage. Traditional Libyan culture emphasizes hospitality, family loyalty, and tribal connections that have provided social organization for centuries. The concept of the Kabila, or tribe, remains important in Libya despite modernization and urbanization, particularly in rural and desert regions where kinship networks continue to provide security and social support. These tribal affiliations often transcend national borders and connect Libyan communities to related groups in neighbouring countries. Libyan cuisine reflects the country's position at the crossroads of Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, incorporating influences from Arab, Berber, Turkish, and Italian culinary traditions. Couscous, various meat dishes, seafood from the Mediterranean, dates from oasis agriculture, and tea culture all contribute to a distinctive food heritage that varies by region and ethnic group. Arts and crafts traditions include carpet weaving, silver jewellery making, leatherwork, and pottery, with different regions and ethnic groups maintaining their own distinctive styles and techniques. Traditional music incorporates Arab, Berber, and African influences, while contemporary Libyan artists continue to explore themes of identity, tradition, and modernity in their work. The challenges facing contemporary Libya include balancing modernization with tradition, managing the country's enormous oil wealth sustainably, and addressing the political fragmentation that has affected the country since 2011. Climate change poses additional challenges to an already arid country, with desertification threatening agricultural areas and water scarcity affecting urban populations.